Hey guys, welcome back to Silent Screams. If you're new here, then buckle up because tonight's story is going to make you rethink even the smallest decisions you make. Sometimes all it takes is one wrong choice, something as simple as trusting a stranger or taking a shortcut to lead you into your worst nightmare. Tonight's tale is one of those, a reminder that not every decision can be undone. You ready? Let's get into it. It was supposed to be just another road trip. We'd done this 100 times before, my buddies and me. I can't even remember where we were headed that night. It doesn't really matter now. All I know is that we were laughing, joking around, talking about nothing important. And then the map app went out. The road in front of us stretched on endless and dark, and I had no idea where we were. We were lost. You sure you know where we're going? Nate asked from the passenger seat, glancing at me. I shot him a sideways look, my grip tightening on the wheel. Yeah, of course. It's just a temporary dead zone. But the truth was, I wasn't sure at all. The road had become narrower, the trees crowding in on both sides like they were closing in on us. The only light came from the car's headlights, which barely cut through the thick fog that had begun to creep in. It wasn't supposed to be this hard to find a highway again. I think we should turn around, said Matt from the back seat. His voice had a nervous edge to it that made me feel even worse. No way, I replied, forcing a laugh that didn't feel natural. I've got this. We kept driving for what felt like hours. The road only seemed to get narrower, darker. Every few miles, I'd see signs that didn't make any sense. Old, rusted signs pointing toward places I'd never heard of. Places that probably didn't exist anymore. But I didn't say anything. I couldn't let them know that I was just as freaked out as they were. Then we saw it. A sign. Fresh, bright, and clean in a way that made it stand out in the darkness. Shortcut to I-87. It read, pointing down a narrow dirt road to the right. That's our ticket, Nate said, leaning forward, squinting at the sign. I-87's the highway we need. Turn there. I hesitated. Something about the sign didn't sit right with me. It was too perfect, too convenient. And yet, what choice did we have? We were running low on gas, and I didn't want to keep driving aimlessly into the night. Yeah, I said slowly, flicking on my blinker. Why not? The dirt road was rough, with rocks kicking up against the undercarriage and potholes that jostled us around in our seats. The trees on either side were even denser here, their branches hanging low, scraping against the car as we passed. The headlights illuminated only a few feet ahead, and the fog grew thicker by the minute. This doesn't feel right, Matt muttered from the back, his face pressed up against the window, staring out into the dark. You worry too much, Nate replied, but his voice was shaky. I didn't say anything. I just kept driving, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease that gnawed at my gut. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. For just a split second, I thought I saw something in the back seat. Not Matt, something else. A shadow, darker than the rest of the night, sitting right next to him. Blinked and it was gone. But the feeling wasn't. Nate, I began, my voice shaking despite myself. Did you see? Before I could finish, the car lurched violently to the left. I fought the wheel, trying to keep control as we skidded off the road and into the ditch. We came to a grinding halt. The car tilted at a sharp angle, half buried in mud. What the hell, man? Nate shouted, bracing himself against the dash. I don't know, I stammered, my hands still gripping the wheel tightly, knuckles white. We sat there in stunned silence for a few moments, the only sound the creaking of the car and the distant hum of insects hidden in the fog. The fog that now swirled around us, almost like it was alive, pressing in on all sides. Great, Matt grumbled, unbuckling his seatbelt. Guess we're walking. Nate reached for his phone, trying to get a signal, but the screen remained blank. No service. Of course. I looked out into the fog, the road ahead completely swallowed by it. My stomach churned. I didn't want to get out of the car. I didn't want to step into that fog. But what choice did we have? "I'll check the car," I muttered, pushing open the door. The air outside was thick, suffocating. Every breath felt wrong, like I was inhaling something that didn't belong in my lungs. I walked around to the front, trying to see if we'd blown a tire or something, but as I crouched down, I saw something else. A single set of footprints, leading away from the car. Bare, human footprints, deep in the mud, heading into the woods. I stood up quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. "Guys, what is it?" Matt asked, stepping out of the car and joining me. His eyes followed mine, landing on the footprints. He paled instantly. "Who's out here?" Nate called out, his voice wavering as he stepped out onto the road. Nobody answered. The fog seemed to thicken, growing more oppressive with each passing second. It clung to us, damp and cold, muffling every sound around us. The world outside the beam of our flashlight was a featureless gray void. We stood there for a moment, none of us speaking, listening to the deafening silence that surrounded us. Then we heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible, carried on the breeze. A voice, somewhere in the fog. "Come." I froze, my blood turning to ice. Nate looked at me, his face pale, his mouth hanging open. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Matt's eyes were wide, his breathing shallow. "We need to get out of here. Now." But the car wasn't going anywhere, and we all knew it. The road ahead was a dead end, nothing but a wall of fog. And the footprints were leading us into the woods. "I don't think we have a choice," I said, swallowing hard. "We follow the footprints." "Are you insane?" Matt snapped, panic rising in his voice. "We don't even know who or what made those." "I know," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. "But we can't stay here." Reluctantly, they followed me, the beam of the flashlight barely cutting through the thick fog. The woods loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. The trees were ancient, their twisted branches hanging low, as if reaching for us. The further we went, the more suffocating the atmosphere became. The air felt heavy, almost like it was pressing down on my shoulders. The footprints led us deeper and deeper into the forest, winding between trees and over roots. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. And then we saw it, an old, crumbling house standing in the middle of the clearing. It looked abandoned, the windows shattered, the wood rotting away. "Seriously?" Nate muttered, staring at the house. "This is where the footprints lead?" I didn't want to go in. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn back. But something was pulling me forward. Something I couldn't explain. "We have to check it out," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Matt shook his head. "No way. This is insane." But as much as I wanted to agree with him, I couldn't. Something was driving me toward that house, something I couldn't ignore. It was as if the house was calling to me, drawing me in. I stepped onto the creaking porch, the wood groaning under my weight. The front door hung open, swaying slightly in the breeze. I shone the flashlight inside, illuminating a long, dark hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. "Let's get this over with," Nate muttered, stepping in behind me. The floorboards creaked beneath our feet as we made our way inside. The house smelled of mildew and decay, the air thick with dust. Every step we took echoed through the empty halls. And then we heard it again. That whispering. It was louder now, almost as if it was coming from the walls themselves. I shone the flashlight around, trying to find the source of the noise, but there was nothing. Just empty rooms and crumbling walls. "We shouldn't be here," Matt said, his voice trembling. I couldn't argue with him. The whole place felt wrong, like it was alive, watching us. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I spun around, half expecting to see someone or something standing behind us. But there was nothing. We pressed on, moving deeper into the house, following the whispering. The walls seemed to close in around us, the air growing colder with each step. My heart was pounding in my chest, my palms slick with sweat. Finally, we reached the end of the hallway, where a single door stood slightly ajar. The whispering was loudest here, as if whatever was behind that door had been waiting for us all along. I reached out, my hand trembling as I pushed the door open. Inside was a small, dimly lit room. The floor was covered in dust, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. In the center of the room stood a single wooden chair, facing the window, and sitting in the chair was a figure, slumped forward, its face hidden. My heart skipped a beat. I could feel my blood turning to ice as I stared at the figure. "Is that a person?" Nate whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had gone dry, my mind racing. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just sat there, completely still. I stepped forward, the floor creaking beneath me. As I got closer, I could see that the figure was covered in dust, as if it had been sitting there for years. But something about it wasn't right. Something about the way it was slumped, the way it sat so unnaturally still, made my skin crawl. I reached out with a trembling hand, inching closer to its shoulder. Just as my fingers were about to brush against the figure's dusty coat, it moved. The head snapped up, and I froze in place. A face, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into me, stared back at me. The mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, and the whispering filled the room, louder now, echoing in my ears. "Come." I stumbled back, my heart racing, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The figure stood slowly, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. The whispering grew louder, deafening. As the figure stepped toward me, its smile widening. "We need to go," Nate whispered, grabbing my arm and pulling me back toward the door. But the figure was blocking our way now, its long, bony fingers reaching out toward us. I turned and bolted, running down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The whispering followed me, growing louder and louder, filling my head, drowning out everything else. We burst out of the house and into the fog, stumbling over roots and rocks as we ran. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, trying to pull us back. We didn't stop until we reached the car. Matt was already inside, frantically trying to start the engine. Nate and I jumped in, slamming the doors behind us. "Go. Go," I shouted, my voice hoarse. The car sputtered to life, and we sped down the dirt road, the house disappearing into the fog behind us. The whispering faded, but the sense of dread lingered, clinging to us like a shadow. None of us spoke the entire drive back. We didn't need to. We all knew what we had seen, what we had barely escaped from. And deep down, we knew that we had made a terrible mistake by going down that road. We didn't talk about it afterward. Not to each other, not to anyone. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in the dark, I still hear the whispering, calling me back. As we sped down the dirt road, the fog clung to the car like a thick blanket, obscuring everything in its path. The trees seemed to close in on us, their branches reaching out like fingers trying to drag us back into the nightmare we had just escaped. My hands were trembling as I gripped the door handle, the memory of that thing. Its smile, its hollow eyes, burned into my mind. Matt kept his foot pressed to the gas, the car bouncing over the rough road as he tried to put as much distance between us and that house as possible. But no matter how fast we went, no matter how hard the engine strained, the fog didn't let up. It was like we were driving through a void, and that horrible whispering still echoed faintly in my ears, even though we'd left the house far behind. "I don't feel right," Nate muttered from the passenger seat, his voice shaky. I glanced at him. His face was pale, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead despite the cold. He kept rubbing the back of his neck as though something was crawling under his skin. I wanted to say something to comfort him, but I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't feel right either. My head was pounding, and my skin felt like it was being pricked by 1,000 invisible needles. There was something wrong with the air here, with this place. It was as if we hadn't really escaped at all. "We'll be back on the highway soon," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We just need to keep driving." Matt didn't respond. He stared straight ahead, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, his eyes wide and unfocused. I wasn't sure if he even heard me. The car's headlights cut through the fog, but they barely illuminated more than a few feet ahead. It was like the world had shrunk down to just us in the car. There was nothing beyond the fog. No trees, no sky, no road, just us. And then, out of nowhere, the car jerked violently to the right. "Matt, what the hell?" I shouted, grabbing onto the dashboard to steady myself. Matt's eyes were wild, his face contorted in panic. It wasn't me. I didn't touch the wheel. The car swerved again, as though something unseen was yanking it off course. Nate screamed, and I looked out the window just in time to see a shadow dart past, too fast for me to make out its shape. "There's something out there," Nate shouted, pointing frantically into the fog. I didn't need him to tell me. I could feel it. Something was circling the car, just beyond the reach of the headlights. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt that same suffocating fear clawing at my throat, the same terror that had gripped me in that house. Whatever it wasn't done with us yet. "Just keep going," I yelled, my voice rising with panic. "Don't stop." Matt slammed his foot on the gas, the tires screeching as we lurched forward. But no matter how fast we went, the shadowy figures kept pace, flitting in and out of the fog, always just at the edge of our vision. I could feel them watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, without warning, the car's engine sputtered and died. No, no, Matt shouted, frantically turning the key in the ignition, but the engine just coughed and wheezed, refusing to start. "Come on, not now." I glanced out the window again, my stomach dropping as I saw the shadows drawing closer. The fog seemed to part for them, revealing twisted, gaunt figures with hollow eyes and grinning mouths, their movements unnatural and jerky, like broken marionettes. "They're coming!" Nate screamed, fumbling with the door handle. "We have to get out of here." "No," I shouted, grabbing his arm before he could open the door. "We can't go out there." But it was too late. Nate threw the door open and bolted into the fog, his footsteps echoing in the silence. For a moment, I just sat there, frozen, watching him disappear into the mist. Then the whispering started again. It was soft at first, just a faint murmur that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But it grew louder, more insistent, the words curling around my mind like fingers. Come back. "Matt," I said, my voice shaking. "We need to get out of here. Now." Matt was still trying to start the car, his hand shaking as he turned the key over and over. But it was useless. The engine was dead, and we were sitting ducks. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment and swung open my door, my heart hammering in my chest. "Come on. We have to find Nate before." A scream tore through the fog, high-pitched and filled with terror. "Nate." I ran toward the sound, the flashlight beam cutting through the mist, but it barely illuminated more than a few feet ahead. The ground beneath my feet was soft and uneven, the fog swirling around me like a living thing, trying to pull me down. I could feel them watching me, the figures in the fog, but I couldn't stop. I had to find Nate. "Nate!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Where are you?" Another scream echoed through the fog, but this time it was cut short, ending in a sickening gurgle that sent chills down my spine. I stumbled forward, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until I saw him. Nate was lying on the ground, his body twisted at an unnatural angle, his face pale and contorted in horror. His eyes were wide open, staring up at the sky, but there was nothing there. Nothing but fog. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hand shaking as I reached out to touch his shoulder. But before I could, I saw it. Something was moving under his skin. I recoiled in horror, stumbling back as Nate's body twitched and jerked, his limbs moving on their own. The thing under his skin, whatever it was, slithered up his neck, and I saw his mouth twist into that same grotesque grin, the same one the figure in the house had worn. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, this can't be happening." But it was. Nate's body began to rise, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. His head lolled to the side, and his empty eyes locked onto mine, his mouth opening in a twisted, unnatural smile. "Come," he whispered, his voice no longer his own. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing, and turned to run, but the fog was thicker now, almost solid, pressing in from all sides. I could hear the whispering all around me, growing louder, more insistent. The shadows in the fog were closing in, their gaunt, hollow-eyed faces watching me with hungry anticipation. I ran blindly, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. But no matter how fast I ran, the whispering followed, the shadows keeping pace, always just out of reach. And then I saw it, the house. I skidded to a stop, my chest heaving, my legs shaking. The house loomed ahead of me, just as decrepit and menacing as before. But there was something different about it now. The windows were glowing faintly, and I could see shapes moving inside, dark silhouettes that seemed to beckon me closer. "Come," the whispers said, louder now, almost deafening. "Come home." I took a step back, my mind racing. I couldn't go back to that house. I knew what waited for me inside. Something dark, something evil. But the fog was closing in, and the shadows were circling, leaving me with no other option. I had to make a decision. I glanced back over my shoulder, my heart pounding in my chest. The figures in the fog were closer now, their hollow eyes gleaming in the darkness. There was no escape, no way out, except the house. I took a deep breath, my hand shaking, and stepped forward. The fog seemed to part as I approached the house, the whispering growing louder, more insistent. The front door swung open on its own, creaking on its hinges, inviting me in. I stepped inside. The air inside the house was thick and suffocating, the walls closing in around me. The whispering was deafening now, filling my head, drowning out my thoughts. I stumbled down a hallway, my flashlight flickering, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. I could feel it. The presence. It was here, watching me, waiting for me to make the wrong move. My skin prickled with fear, every nerve of my body screaming at me to turn back. But there was nowhere to go. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the walls twisting and warping as I walked. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, the sound distorted, as though I were walking through water. And then, at the end of the hall, I saw it. The door. It was the same door I had seen before, the one that led to that small, dimly lit room. The same door that had led me to that grinning figure. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to go back in, but I knew I had no choice. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, as I reached for the doorknob. My hand trembled as I turned it, the door creaking open to reveal the room beyond. It was empty. The chair in the center of the room was gone, and the window was shattered, the glass scattered across the floor. The air was cold, and the faint sound of wind whistled through the broken panes. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it, the presence, the thing that had followed us from the moment we set foot on that cursed road. It was here, in this room, waiting for me. I took a step inside, my flashlight flickering, the beam casting eerie shadows on the walls. And then I saw it. A figure stood in the corner of the room, its back to me, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its clothes were torn and dirty, its skin pale and gaunt. But I knew, without even seeing its face, that it wasn't Nate. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was the thing that had been following us all along. The whispering stopped, replaced by a deafening silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I stood frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. And then, slowly, the figure began to turn. Its movements were slow and deliberate, its head swiveling around to face me before its body followed. And when I saw its face, my blood turned to ice. It was me. The figure smiled, its hollow eyes locking onto mine, and I felt a cold, suffocating terror grip my heart. It raised a hand, beckoning me forward, its mouth twisting into that same grotesque grin I had seen on Nate. "Come," it whispered, its voice my own. I stumbled back, my flashlight slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. The beam flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. And in the darkness, the whispering started again. Louder this time, closer. And then everything went black.